And white students drop out at a rate of 11%. White students are suspended at a rate of 18%. If we compare that with Black students, graduate at a rate of 69%, drop out at a rate of 20%, and at least 42% of Black students have at least one suspension in their school experience. And then why is it that we talk about anti-Black racism in particular, rather than just racism? Is because if we look at the last column, other racialized students, we see that the graduation rate is 87%. So other racialized students are actually graduating at a higher rate than white students in some communities, and a dropout rate lower than white students. So this is why we don't just talk about racism. We differentiate the experience that Black and Indigenous people are having as compared to East Asian people, let's say South Asian people. It's important that we differentiate and that we try to use this data to understand the experiences. So we could see that where it comes to academic achievement, suspensions, and expulsions, there's a huge disparity that continues within the system. And definitely those factors are related. There's a lot of data to demonstrate that students who have at least one suspension on their record are actually less likely to graduate from school. And that's where we get this notion of push out rates instead of dropout rates. Our students are not dropping out of school because they're not interested in school. They're being pushed out because of disengaging curriculum, punitive and inequitable discipline, and low expectations and inappropriate pedagogy. So it's important as well that when we look at this data, that we understand that it's a systemic problem that reflects on the system, rather than a problem with the Black students, parents, or community. So, and this is also relevant in terms of talking to our kids about racism. If there's an incident that happens between two students, does this data have anything to do with that? What do y'all think? You could put something in the chat if you think so. An individual conflict between two students, what does that have to do with this data? I'm letting P. Okay. That's okay, Ian. Okay, the way they're disciplined, thank you. So exactly, it's important for us to bear in mind that when there's a conflict between two students, it's very likely that anti-Blackness could play a factor in the way that the students are disciplined as an outcome of the conflict. So yes, even when our own children have conflicts at school, it's still important to keep this data in mind when we are talking to our kids about what happens. And it's important for us to be able to encourage our children to be allies, to intervene. So let's continue on. Okay, and in the first session, we talked a lot about the fact that every time when there has been racism and oppression of Black people, there has also been resistance. So does anybody recognize the person who is in this image here? If not, that's okay. Okay. All right, so this is actually a picture of Marlene Green, she was born in Dominica and came to Canada in the 1960s. And she was part of a conversation in which many Black parents had concerns about the education system in Canada. They were concerned about streaming, high dropout rates, and the lack of quality education when it came to Black children and youth. She founded something called the Black Education Project in the 1960s, which was the height of Caribbean immigration to Toronto. Among many things, BEP provided tutoring to Black students, and helped in their affirming of their African heritage. This was a hub of activism and a place where many educational programs took place. BEP was not only advocated for Black students, but provided school programs, summer camps, and helped parents to integrate into the system. So do any of those issues that Black parents complained about in the 1960s ring a bell for you? Does it remind you of anything? Well, unfortunately, these are the exact same issues that Black communities are still complaining about today. Streaming, low expectations, punitive discipline, low achievement. So if we go on, this is an image of Lennox Farrell, who was a member of the Black Action Defense Committee. And they were a Black group who was Toronto-based, who fought a lot against police brutality in the 1990s. And Lennox Farrell was also an educator and a teacher. And he was particularly interested in what was going on for Black youth at the time. He complained about police surveillance in the schools. Black Action Defense Committee attended over 100 meetings with the York District School Board, talking about what? Low teacher expectations, streaming, inappropriate and punitive discipline. And the York and the school board offered anti-Black racism training for all staff. And they offered to look into the discipline issues. This is such a parallel conversation to that Black Lives Matter Black Lives Matter Toronto had with the Toronto District School Board in 2017. So it's important for us to know these histories so that we could see this is not a new issue. We don't need to research or study the experiences that Black youth have. In fact, some of those research studies, it's almost like insult to injury at this point. We know these issues, they've been continuing for decades. Carl James wrote an article, in fact, about all of these different studies and committees and commissions that have happened over the past 4 decades for Black students. And to just point out that these issues are not new for our communities. So if we continue on, next slide. This is a beautiful image of 2 students at Umoja Learning Circle, which was a private Afrocentric school in Rexdale. So often when we think of private schools, we think of something that could be like elitist, but Umoja Learning Circle offered a lot of fully subsidized positions for Black kids in the Rexdale community and in the Jane Finch community when it used to be in Eddystone. And Umoja Learning Circle was an initiative to ground Black students in Black-focused pedagogy. So we talk about how the Eurocentric curriculum could be disengaging. Umoja Learning Circle was a place where Black students could learn about our own histories, what's important for our communities. They also had really interesting initiatives like they did composting, and they raised worms to sell to create a college fund for Black students. And they did a lot of land-based learning, connections to Indigenous centered learning. And they spent a lot of time in Rexdale in the Humber River. So let's go on to the next one. And not only have these interesting alternatives been created outside of the school system, there's also been massive push from the Black community for change within the school system. This picture people may recognize from media. There was a lot of controversy around 2007 about the opening of an Afrocentric public school. And at the time, they said this school would be the first public Afrocentric school in Canada's history. That's actually not true. If we go back to the 1970s, Black communities lobbied for public Afrocentric schools in the 1970s, and they were given programs led by Black women that were inside the school system. So, but yet, when there was a huge push from community for the public Afrocentric school in 2007, there was a big debate that happened in the media about, is this segregation? So what do y'all think? A public Afrocentric school, is that segregation? How does that relate to the slide that we saw earlier about segregation in Canada? Is it the same thing? I'm just checking out the chat here in case people would like to say anything about that. But when I saw the debate in the media about is this segregation, it really made me lament about the fact that we don't really learn what segregation is in Canada in school. And so the conversation was very problematic, the way how it was presented in the media. So Ben is saying in the chat, I think it is to undo the effects of segregation. Exactly. So segregation is a mandated system that people were forced to undergo. The separation was forced, and it was, remember what we said, it was presented, an unequal opportunities were presented to Black and white people. So whereas with the Afrocentric school, it was an attempt to ground Black students in learning about the histories and experiences of Black people within the public system. And it's kind of bizarre that it would be questioned to the extent that it was, because it sort of speaks to how Eurocentrism would be the default. We're all used to the education curriculum being grounded in the experiences of white people, Europeans. So it was very jarring for people to hear about the public Afrocentric school taking shape. So we'll just go on to the next one, please. Thank you. And this is an image of a principal at CW Jeffries. I'm not sure if he's still in that school, but his name is Monday Gala. And in CW Jeffries, they decided to pilot a program to end streaming. After these decades of conversations about streaming, there was an initiative at CW Jeffries that said, why don't we just get rid of academic stream and non-academic stream, and instead support students the way that they need to achieve what they should be achieving in high school. It was a very successful initiative, and I believe that it's important. It's demonstrative of the fact that there's even resistance within the school system, and that we can ask for we can make bold demands of accountability on the part of the education system, and we can make big change if we so choose to, and we work at it. So gonna go on. Okay, so we're just gonna take a minute to reflect on this. What issues discussed do you connect to in thinking about your own child's school? So thinking about the different issues that we discuss in terms of anti-Black racism in education, do any of those issues remind you of your own child's educational experience or the dynamics present in your own child's school? So we will just look at a few questions that could help us really think through this. So if we could go on to the next one here. And the next one. Okay, so Nudes is gonna bring us through this slide so we could discuss this scenario.
Okay, so You realize your child continually has a problem with a Black peer, but the teacher and admin staff assures you the problem lies with the Black student. What do you do? So as a parent, what are some of the things that you could do anywhere? So what could you do at home? Yeah, you could talk to your kid more and find out what's really going on. And in that, you can ask questions about the environment of what's happening. What happened before? What happens after? Ben says, my child's school is extremely white. They're well-intentioned people, some sincere, but it's difficult to bridge gaps without direct exposure between Black and white children. Adrian says, try and reach out to the other child's parent and see if we can resolve it, and then see if we can correct the school. I like that, as a parent community coming together and showing your kids that they have your support and that you can all learn together and stand up for each other. Yeah, talk to the Black child's guardian. Ask the school admin why they feel the problem lies with the child. It's a good direct question. Correct the issue with the school. Definitely. It's the same thing of, going through the slides that we saw, especially with the push out rates, right? If we see that your child or other children continually have a problem with a Black child, and the staff kind of dismisses your child's part in it and highlights the Black student's part in it, that's something that Black students deal with regularly, right? So yeah, those are some great things. And also talking to your child as well about racism and finding out how they feel in that environment about the child, or just how they feel in that environment. Some kids feel powerless, and in order for them to feel powerful, they go after someone that they can, right? And when the admin is behind them in that, it becomes very difficult for the Black family and the child. Okay, let's move to the next one. Microaggressions. So your child complains that they are being mistaken for another student of similar heritage by their teacher. This continues for over 3 months. What do you do? It takes me a while to get to kids' names as well, but let's see what your ideas could be. So Leroy says, I would ask my child what annoys them about this other child. Oh, for the last one. I would teach my child about different learning styles and needs. For example, some kids call out and need support with self-regulation. Sometimes kids see things as annoying because they don't understand. Very true. And it's really not up to the children to manage those situations, right? So for this one, Farah says, speak with the teacher directly. Have to bring it up with the teacher. It doesn't take 3 months to learn names. Ben says, I try and teach my children verbal assertiveness so they can speak up and correct the teacher. Darren says, speak with the teacher. 3 months is a long time. They won't forget again after being called out. True. Adrian says, my child was white. My child is white, but I would like to think I would calmly let the teacher know this is upsetting my child and hope they would be able to correct it. Leroy says, I would speak to them after 3 days. Very nice. Yeah, another thing is, a lot of learning happens in the school, not just for the children. Teachers should take part in learning as well. And it's okay for them to learn that people are different, they are individuals, and that we all don't come from the same place. The whole idea that we all look the same is a very disgusting and degrading idea. There's many things that we can do to learn, like bringing in parents as experts, right? We don't have to call on professionals and blow the budget. We can share a budget with the parent community or teacher community or caregivers in our community, shopkeepers, other people that are part of our school community can assist as well as experts. Ingrid says, sounds like a confused teacher. Perhaps a suggestion to put kids' names on all the desks so the one kid doesn't stand out, but help the teacher with something for all the students. That's very sweet. I like that. I actually saw a teacher had done that and the kids got to decorate their plates. It was Leroy and I's niece, actually, or my niece. And it was a nice artful way of doing it. And Leroy says there are great books such as The Name Jar that can be used to bring up issues around racism and names. That's fantastic. So if you have resources to share with the teacher, or if you'd like to discuss with the teacher, maybe what resources they're lacking in their classroom, and come together and help them sort that out, that's a great way too to support each other. Okay, next slide, please. All right, Leroy, take it.
Okay. So a few other scenarios we have here. Curriculum. You realize your child is learning nothing about Blackness in class. What do you do? So this is something that I've dealt with pretty much every year of my child's education, and other children in my community, my care. And it's interesting because a lot of times, I think our bar is so low when it comes to this, that a lot of times we have a conversation around nothing is being done for Black History Month. The particular school site that I'm in is not doing anything for Black History Month. And it's like, while that is unfortunate that there's no attention being paid to that, it's kind of sad that that's our expectation at this point. We should at least talk about Blackness during Black History Month. But I think really we should talk about and include the experiences and contributions of Black people and communities all through the year, any month. So what do y'all think? What would you do if this were the case? Or what have you done in the past if this has happened? Well, I can start by saying, okay, so call Freedom School. It's like call Ghostbusters. Yeah, I think that it kind of speaks to the fact that it has to be everybody's job to see and recognize erasure within the curriculum. It can't be only Black people, Black parents who continue, and Indigenous parents who continually say, how come there's nothing in the classroom content that speaks to my child's experiences? Valerie says, talking to the teacher, but it's bigger than that. It's gotta be an expectation from the admin that teachers seek out inclusive resources. Exactly. So, and a lot of times people do talk about the curriculum itself being Eurocentric, but I actually think that that's not such a great excuse, because the curriculum is actually quite open when it comes to thinking about which experiences we should prioritize and speak about. It's just that teachers need experience and guidance around how to use a lens that the children could relate to when interpreting the curriculum. So for example, there's a requirement to study ancient civilizations, but there's nothing that says which civilization it should be. There might be something in the curriculum in brackets that says, for example, this one or this one, but there's nothing to stipulate which it should be. So teachers then need the guidance and experience to know how to approach that in a way that reflects the diversity in Toronto. So if that's not happening, anybody should be able to say, you know, this assignment, it's not really looking at this. And with my kids, I often tell them to do the assignment because I want them to be successful in school. But I tell them, make a list of questions that you have for the teacher, such as, okay, you're learning about colonialism. It says that this is what European settlers are doing and this is what Indigenous people are doing. Make a list of questions. What were Black people doing in that time period? What was the relationship between Black people and Indigenous people? Stuff like that. Because I think that it's important for everybody to participate in keeping people on their toes. So Amy said, I like your idea from the first session. School councils could give every class some books for each room and teachers to read. That helps a lot, just having those resources available. And things like actions like that, this is how we talk to our kids about racism. It's not only about the individual conversations that we have with our kids, it's about what do we do to intervene in racism as it is embedded in the fabric of our society. And then Adrian said, I think sometimes schools may not have the resources, unfortunately. I agree with Amy about getting the books and materials. So I agree, and I think that we are a lot of times as educators working with limited resources. I remember in my first year of teaching, I used to trek back from the Toronto Public Library every week to get books to put in my classroom library. Did I have a lot of library fines? Yes. Did it make it so that my kids could have access to diverse materials? Yes. So it's like there's always something that we could do to make it work. And I know especially in French immersion, it could be a challenge to find those resources that really speak to Black experiences, but we have to do it because the other option would be just people being left out and erased. Auntie Nude said admin can also build their school's resources so teachers know where to go. That's really important. Sarah says, I feel lucky to be at Blake, although I grew up in this neighborhood and learning is very different now. The learning and the library, the land acknowledgement are so different from when I was little in Toronto. Yeah, we've really come a long way. I think the only book that I saw in my school library that had Black people in it was Tintin, and the colonial nature of Tintin. Whew. Nude said, have fun and fundraise for more resources, cultural learning days. Yeah, like we as people, as parents can do things like that. We can push for the allocation of resources for where they should be going within our parent body. And then Duana said, how would you respond to educators who say they're unfamiliar with teaching about Black culture and community or are fearful of getting it wrong? So this is a big issue. The fact that people do not want to say the wrong thing, do not want to participate in, let's say, cultural appropriation, or they could be afraid of that. When we were kids, a lot of times the only engagement that we had that would be like non-Eurocentric would be like, okay, the whole class, we're gonna make a dream catcher, something like that. There are certain practices that are not something that a whole class should engage in as a craft because it's not respectful. So things that are sacred or spiritual. So for example, a lot of people don't know this, but dream catchers, obviously, but also a lot of people don't know that djembe drums are very sacred and spiritual for communities. It's said that the djembe drum holds 3 different souls. So it's important when you do want to share these diverse experiences, that you think about, is this something sacred and spiritual for communities? Am I the right person to transmit knowledge around this? Even within the Indigenous communities, There are certain teachings that are meant to be shared from certain people to certain other people. And it's not necessarily from anybody to anybody else. So it takes some sensitivity and looking into the situation more and some thoughtfulness to know, is this something that I should be sharing from my vantage point, or should I invite somebody into my classroom or school community who has the knowledge and expertise to be able to offer those teachings? So I think that, like, in regards to Duana's question, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but in regards to your question, I think that educators, it's fair for people to be fearful about getting it wrong, but it's also not an excuse. There's always opportunities to invite people into your classroom to co-teach with you, to do guest speaking, and to amplify the voices of people who are directly experiencing things, so that you don't have to speak on people's behalf. I'm talking about the teacher or the educator. So Amy has said, virtual school has presented the opportunity for educators to use video. Would you say that there are more resources of Blackness online that educators could use? Yeah, I think when it comes now to English language instruction, I could no longer say that the resource issue is an excuse. Because we do have so many online resources. We have full libraries of Black books for children. We have a different book list. We have all these various Black bookstores. We even have, we have so many resources available, to be honest. So sometimes it's a matter of, I've literally gone into my child's classroom with a stack of books and said, just keep this until you get some. So you could do the same thing and let the teacher know about your expectation when it comes to this. Okay, yay, I pronounced your name correctly. Was curious from the perspective of a parent who's unhappy with a reluctant educator. Okay, yeah, and that's really unfortunate because it's so important. So I think sometimes we just have to approach the conversation like, to be honest, I'm gonna be prioritizing the experiences of those people, students, those young people in your class who might be marginalized, and I'm gonna be prioritizing them when bringing this conversation to you. So although teachers, sometimes we could be really territorial about our classrooms, but that's not fair because it's not helping us to best service everybody in our class. If everybody in our class matters, then that means that we need to speak to all their experiences. Okay, let's go on to the next one. This curriculum one is a big one. Scenario, this is another big one. Discipline. You go to drop off lunch for your child each day for a week. Oh, wow, you're such a good parent. And you realize that a Black student in the class is inside for detention for the 3rd time that week. What do you do? What would you do? I must say I very awkwardly have had this experience before. But seriously, what would you do? I know what Nudes would do. Okay, so Ben said, I would try to engage with the kid to see what's going on and how they're doing. I think that like, it's so powerful. It's such a simple thing to say, hey, how are you doing? Are you okay? And then just be that person that the kid feels like cares about them that day, and ask and check in how they're doing. It really goes a long way to have one person in the school building who you feel like is interested in your well-being. Somebody said, Adrian said, not sure. Would there be some privacy concerns about asking the teacher? I might ask my child first. Okay, so it's important to consider people's privacy. And I think that there are ways that we could interject in this situation without necessarily violating the privacy of the child. I do think that it would be probably inappropriate to ask for details about why is he in here? What did he do? Da, 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 or he or she or they. But I do think that we could say, you know, have you ever considered using transformative justice or restorative circles in your classroom? I hear that it really cuts down on a lot of conflicts, and it really takes a lot of your time, you know, it's your recess. So maybe if you don't want to always have kids in here, you could consider the restorative justice circle. Here's some resources that I have to share about how that works, restorative justice. Or you could go to the principal, the administrators, and say, perhaps you would consider adopting a transformative justice protocol as a school. So, you know, if you know of a particular teacher who handles this really well, maybe they would be interested in doing transformative justice circles for other classes. Maybe they would consider forming a transformative justice league of youth who could help problem solving within the school, and not necessarily the big problems where, like, you know, kids have a fight or something, but those little things like you didn't do your homework. Those things are very easily addressed within transformative justice circles, and it's very empowering for kids to participate. So speaks to my child's teacher, shows some concerns, and hopefully they would look into it. Yeah, honestly, I just think that being that we are adults, although we might feel disempowered in certain situations vis-a-vis the school, we have more power than kids in these situations. And so when we see these things happening, we have to say something and we have to do something. Even if it didn't work out, it's like at least the teacher noticed, oh, somebody noticed that this Black child is being always disciplined within the class, and somebody had an issue. So they would take pause for a moment and at least think about it, even if they don't end up implementing the different suggestions. Okay, and then saying something also models for our children what assertive action looks like. Exactly. So anytime that I witness anti-Blackness and my child is present, I always feel compelled to say something, only so that she could see that I said something. Okay, let's push on to the next one here. I think we just have, good night, Sarah. I think we just have one more before the breakout room. Okay, so resources. Scenario, you notice that all of the books available in online library your child is using for virtual learning feature white children. What do you do? We kind of like address this. Send the teacher links to other books. Yeah, simple solution, really easy, but really, again, the point is just that this is something that Black parents deal with all the time. And oftentimes we don't see it as a choice of whether or not we should say something, because our kids are not going to be able to function in that environment if we don't say something. So it's really important that everybody contributes to these kind of interventions. Okay, so let's go on to the next one, please. Okay, so now we're going to get into some breakout rooms with some of our support educators and support parents tonight. So Simone is here again, Emmanuel and Marsha is here this week. And in the breakout rooms, we're just gonna discuss these 4 topics, because we're gonna do a Q&A in the last about 25 minutes tonight, but I want the Q&A, we would like the Q&A to be meaningful and for y'all to pose us questions about the various topics, so that as we prepare for the final sessions, we know what you're wondering about. So your questions, we want to know what questions do you have about the history of anti-Blackness in Canada in general, what we looked at the first session. What questions do you have about talking to your child about racism that linger and remain? What questions do you have about racism in the Ontario education system? What we spoke about this evening? And what questions do you have about helping your child address racism at school? So when we go into the breakout rooms, we're going to talk about those things. And you are going to, as a group, compile your list of questions. So then when we come back, you could keep your question if you want to ask yourself, or you could share with your group facilitator and they can share back your question. But we just really want to get people's questions so we could speak to what you're interested in. So,
we had talked about doing it by school.
yeah.
Do you still want to do that? Or do we
I would love to do that, but do you have like, are you,
Yeah, I have them ready to go. So I just opened them. I'm not sure.
oh, cool. Okay. And you have like each of the co-hosts in one?
Not yet, but we can do that. Yeah. You want to assign people?
Oh yeah, let me just help you.
And then can folks see the breakout room menu?
There's a little button on the bottom that popped up saying breakout rooms.
Perfect. Click
You
that.
click on that, then it gives you the choices.
Awesome. Hopefully it works for people.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna just make sure that you all have. Let's see, good.
This is the first time it's worked.
Where's Auntie Nudes?
You put her in a room, I think, already.
Oh,
You put her in, yeah.
okay. So only East and Earl Grey. Simone, are you here? Oh, okay. Is that Simone?
Oh, it's Simon, maybe? We make them host?
Ian, I don't see my own name in order to like put myself.
Oh,
In a room now?
I think we're in a room of 8.
I see you. Do you want to? Hi. Which school are you with?
We're with
Grey.
Earl Grey.
Okay, I'll assign you to Earl Grey. 1 second. Here we go.
Yeah, assign me to Earl Grey, please.
Okay.
And then I'm not sure which group.
You want to go to Earl Grey, Leo?
I'll go to Earl Grey, but I don't see Simone if she's already in one.
No, I don't see her in one. No.
I don't seem to be in a breakout room.
Okay, yes, you're not. And I will assign you. Can, which school are you with?
Like,
Like, oh yes, hi.
I'm also here. I'm with like 2.
Right, assign to
Who? Same. I'm also Blake.
Earl Grey.
Join.
Oh crap! Did I send you to the wrong school? I may have sent someone to the wrong school. Darren, what school are you with?
Leslieville.
Okay. Okay.
Hey there, sorry, I don't think I was assigned to a room. I'm from Blake.
Okay. Unassigned. Oh, I don't have any.
But you know what? Because I'm in the middle of doing bedtime, I'm happy to take a pause. I'll just stay on like during the white space and then I'll
Sure.
if that's okay. So you can just leave me here in the abyss.
Sure. That's good. Okay. Cool. I think that's everyone, Leroy.
Okay. Okay. So now we can begin the Q&A. So I think maybe just in case people, the idea of doing this activity with every the breakout rooms was just because a lot of times when there's a Q&A, it just like sneaks up on you and you don't really like know what to ask. So we just wanted to have more time for people to reflect on questions that they have that are outstanding. So in order to get all the questions, we'll just maybe go from school to school and see what questions people had within the school. So when it's time for your school, you can ask your question directly if you feel like it. And then if you don't ask it, maybe the facilitators can ask of the different groups, can bring up some questions that people had as well. So why don't we begin with maybe Blake? Does anybody from Blake have questions, or I think it was Nudes, right?
Yeah. So I'm
Okay.
going to put the 3 questions that we were discussing. So the first one we were discussing, and sorry, I don't remember your name, but the principal from Blake was explaining to us how C.W. Jeffries and the principal there had changed streaming for high schools, and that it had changed from after grade 9 being sort of pushed in one direction or being able to choose, that was then done in the later grades. Did I get that correct? So I'm gonna mute now.
Okay, and maybe the principal from Blake can
Stop, please.
also, do people have their mics on now, Ian?
Yep, everyone can unmute and show video.
Okay, so hi, the principal from Blake, and maybe that person can also add some information to the chat or just saying it out if you would like to. But so if streaming starts in grade 10 or grade 9, it's like, how do I say? I think that what Monday Gala and C.W. Jeffries changed in terms of streaming is really important, because it just goes to show that you can push it within your school space to intervene in something that's just not acceptable. So in terms of the streaming conversation, Monday Gala, and I think it was Jackie Spence, who was also involved with that, really just said, in my school, I'm not going to have streaming. So it wasn't a matter of when it's going to start or how we could reduce the amount of Black students streamed. They just decided not to do it in their school space. So I think that was the biggest thing. It just gave people permission to reject the idea.
And I'm Jen, I'm the principal at Blake. I guess the addition that I just made is that had a significant impact on all high schools in the Toronto District School Board. Probably about, I think, 3 years ago, system-wide, they stopped streaming at the grade 9 and 10 level. So streaming still exists for applied and academic in grade 11 and 12, but because of the work that Monday started, it stopped everywhere in 9 and 10. C.W. Jeffries doesn't stream at all the way up to grade 12. But it had a huge impact on all kids, not just kids at C.W. Jeffries.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, that's actually really good to know. And so why, okay, actually, Nudes, do you want to keep going
Yes.
with this?
Okay, and so then the second question is, why is the term racialized used, and what does it mean? And so we talked a little about that. Jennifer had a great way of explaining that that could be a way of empowering people, and as a good alternative to using things like being called a minority or non-white. And we talked a little bit about why do terms change, and how that happens. Megan was talking about in the disability justice section, there's tons of terms that were used, but once they get perverted or used as derogatory, then, they absolutely have to change. And Leroy, would you like to add anything to the term racialized?
No, I think that's a great explanation. I think also racialized, it just means that it's a process of what happens to people. People aren't really races. Like there's no like Caucasian race, Negroid race, like all of that is made up for the purpose of exploitation. So racialized is just acknowledging races aren't real, but this process is real.
Right. Thanks. And our third question, restorative justice. What does it look like as it pertains to schools? Would you like to talk about restorative justice and I'll talk about transformative justice? Or would you like to start? Answer the question, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So restorative justice is this idea that instead of punishing people, we can try to restore balance when there's harm done. So for example, restorative justice, you stole my radio, give it back and say sorry. Restorative justice has its roots in indigenous justice practices. But the problem is we don't live in that context right now. We live in colonialism. So if we restore things back to how they were racist before. So, or they were sexist before, or they were homophobic before. So there's underlying problems that need to be addressed. So that's where transformative justice comes in. What you want to say?
Oh, you're doing so well. I love that example of the, so Leroy has shared with us this great example of the differences between punitive discipline, restorative justice, and transformative justice. So punitive justice is you stole my radio, you go to jail, you pay a fine. Jail or a fine. Restorative justice is you stole my radio, you come and say sorry to me, and you give me back my radio. Transformative justice is you stole my radio, so let's see how we can all have radios, because there's something that you're missing. There's something that something in your environment doesn't support you to feel powerful. So when we do transformative justice circles, what we find is that it gives everyone in the situation an opportunity to feel powerful, to feel like they can be heard, and that they can be part of the solution. Okay. And those were our questions.
Okay. So who else do we have? What about?
Also, I would like to say, sorry, with examples of discipline in the school and coming up with alternatives, transformative justice is a great way, and doing, like Jennifer was saying, you guys practice restorative circles, doing transformative justice circles and getting groups involved or classes involved on a regular basis teaches the kids a different language, a different culture of dealing with problems. And it really cuts down on the need for discipline measures. And then the children find that the expectations are higher, because not only are the expectations lying with the teachers, but they're lying with their peers and with themselves, right?
Can I add to
you get
that?
to find out so much. Simone, and you get to find out so much from your kids. Yes, Simone.
Okay, so this is a practice that Leroy and Auntie Nudes taught me, and I use it at Rose Avenue. I even tried it with my kindergarten students this year. And so let's just say there's a problem that happens, whether students are crying or like arguing over toys and things like that. I just say we're going to we're going to have a transformative justice circle. This is a big word for kindergartens. And then I explained to them the first time that this just means it's a problem solving circle. So when we sit in that circle, I'm like, why is Miss Peters asking us to sit in this circle? And they said it's to solve problems. And then I remind them that I said, Miss Peters hates calling the principal because I know that you guys can solve this problem better than him. So it empowers them just by saying that I don't want to. So I'm like, of course, they're kindergartens. I would never call the principal, but I just let them know that they can advocate, their voice needs to be heard, and they can all learn from their peers. And this is one of the 4 frames, like problem solving. So I think this is really good at the kindergarten level, because a lot of people think it's for older grades, but I think it's important to start it from young so that they know how to advocate for themselves. Or if there's a problem that happens, they can say, this is what happened. And I would say, don't tell me, you need to talk to your friend. And if that doesn't work, then we'll sit in a circle and we'll solve it together. And then we'll go around and talk about how everyone felt, what they saw. And another thing I do, or well, I don't do, is use names. So when there's a problem, I don't say, she said this. We just talk about the problem without using names. And I think it's helped because students aren't angry, because you're not pointing fingers at anyone. It's just literally a space to solve problems in an organic way, where I'm just there to facilitate, as opposed to say, you need to say sorry. Like, they're doing it all by themselves, but I'm just here to support them in the process. So I just think it's a good practice, especially to start from like kindergarten, so that it doesn't go to the point where we're calling principals or the police are involved. Like, they can just solve it together. And I just think that's a very important approach. My little rant, sorry.
No, I think it's great. And I think the other awesome thing about transformative justice is like everybody has a job to repair the problem, even the teacher and even the principal. So like sometimes if a problem comes up, even if it seems unrelated to me as the teacher, like let's say it's one student like kicking their desk. Sometimes I even find out now it's me who has to make an adjustment. This lesson that I was doing in math, it was too boring or it was too irrelevant to the students or something. So it gives us all like stuff to take away and think about. Thanks, Simone. Yeah, that's so fun in kindergarten. You can do Transformers circle.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love that.
So what about what other schools? PAPE? Who had a PAPE?
I think I had PAPE, I think.
Okay. Take it away.
So the parent, their child's age is 7, to give like some context for like what's important to them. So for the first question, she said her daughter questions why we're making such a point about anti-Blackness in Canada. And pretty much because racism isn't really highlighted as much in Canada. And most of the stories or resources that they can use or present at home is based like about like American history. So it's their daughter's basically like trying to figure out how it's relevant to her life. So yeah. And for that, basically, she said that she's been learning a lot from the workshops about the history of anti-Blackness in Canada, and will continue to use what she's learned and continue to like research more based on what she's learned, so that she'll have more information to tell her daughter. And also she was not aware of slavery in Canada before this workshop series. So yeah. And for the second one, what questions do you have about talking to your child about racism? Again, just like to go into it further, just like to explain why it's important and challenges with explaining racism in Canada. Stuff like that. And what questions do you have about racism in Ontario, in the Ontario education system? A comment was, there needs to be more information and resources about Black history specific to Canada. And also, how do they balance this at home if they don't cover it at school? Like, how would they supplement the learning at home? And Simone gave a lot of examples on how she includes those topics in the classroom while sticking to the curriculum. So Simone mentioned, like, in math, she would just like use examples of different hairstyles to discuss fractions, and including Black history, not just in February, so it doesn't necessarily feel like a specific event or like this is the only space to discuss Blackness, but to just include it throughout the year, regardless of whether it's Black history or not. And just to be creative and just include it in creative ways. And Simone also talked about how she includes discussing protests and things like that in a way that's appropriate for children, but they're still interested in it. And we kind of got to the last question, but like right at the end when we came back. So for the last question, what questions do you have about helping your child address racism at school? The parent asked, what are ways that she can address her actions, her child's reactions to otherness, not necessarily just to Blackness, but just to like any situation or individual that seems very different. So it's not necessarily limited to race, but in any way, like they just have a reaction to otherness, and what are ways to address that? Yeah.
So Ben says the blood painted Egerton Ryerson statue was a good teachable moment when I was there recently with my kids. That's dope. And Leroy says there's some good books too when talking about the Canadian context, like Africville and Viola Desmond's story. Those are great. I was going to say also, you guys have access to this slide, and in the earlier sessions, we talked about resources. So those are good jumping points and places to just find the resources, and then jumping points from there to do discovery on your own based on, your family's interest and what happens in your community and with your family. Thanks, Marshy. I'm so happy to see my team.
Okay, so who else did we have in the house?
Mm-hmm.
We had Blake.
Leslieville.
Yeah, Leslieville. Who was Leslie? Emmanuel, were you Leslieville? It was Emmanuel.
I was. Hello. Hi. So I had Leslieville. The question was, are these workshops also available for teachers or only for parents? And I'm gonna let Amy take over because she's part of the Parents Council and she had a great answer. Awesome. Yes, Amy, thank you.
Hi, everyone. So as a council, we have talked often about how we can and cannot spend our money, and we've had speakers come in and talk to our council about how we can and cannot spend our fundraising money. And as we understand it, we can't pay to run information education sessions for our teachers. But the way we kind of got around it is when we agreed to sort of partner on these 3 sessions was we advertised it that it was open to everybody, to parents, to guardians, to staff, to community members, and that we were everybody was welcome. And we actually had 3 of our teachers register. And yeah, so that was one way. And as an extension of that, the other thing we talked about was from the first session, which was, I believe, Leroy's suggestion, and as a council that we can bring back ideas from these sessions in the way of, like we talked about, actual kits and resources and books that we would pay for, buy, and hand each teacher in each class, knowing that at least there was some resources in each classroom. So yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Emmanuel, was there any others that y'all have?
No, this was the question that was asked. Besides that, we just went through the questions that you gave us.
Okay, perfect.
I just want to say as well, yes, these workshops are available for teachers. All teachers can access our resources. You can definitely talk to your parent council. You can get teachers to reach out to us directly. There are also, when teachers look in their, I'm not sure what it's called, but it's a database of partnerships. If they look for terms like Black History Month, they will find a lot of different offerings there. So searching for the right key terms sometimes is just helpful. But yeah, definitely the workshops are available for parents, teachers, kids, admin, all around. And definitely that we share our learning.
I'll just add one more thing that we sort of talked about, and this is something that the other councils can take back too, was that sort of use your influence and use your money to make change. And you know, as Leslieville Council, we pay for 4 performances every year. And so, you know, when we can have assemblies again one day, to sort of be careful about where we're spending that money and influence where that money can be spent, who we want coming in to speak, the topics we want spoken about, the speakers, the themes, yeah, that's it.
Excellent. Great. Okay. And then actually for East, was there any participants for East? Ian?
No, we're not.
Yeah, I think there wasn't. So then the last one was Earl Grey. So, and Earl Grey had like super good questions. So y'all can also say your questions if you feel like it. But there was a question, what does intersectionality, like how does that play out in the classroom? So intersectionality basically is this idea that our race isn't the only thing that identifies us. We would also have other aspects of our identity that could contribute to our oppression, such as gender, religion, class, sexual orientation, and all those things make up our gender. So, and they also make up our experiences of oppression. And it's not just that like being Black would be one way of being oppressed and then being queer would be a different way. It's like being Black and queer together would be one specific experience. So, and then when it comes to like the classroom, the more layers you add in terms of oppression, the more erasure tends to happen. So I think how it really plays out in the classroom is like when we're offering these expectations to teachers around including Blackness, it's important that we specify that we would like to include the stories of those who are most marginalized as well too, like the stories of Black LGBT people, the experiences of Black Muslim people, the experiences of Black people with disabilities, and so on. And then there's lots of other ways to play out in the classroom, like, for example, experiences with punitive discipline. There's some statistics around the number of people who are incarcerated who have disabilities, and it's a very high number. And then there's also stats around the overrepresentation of Black people. So then Black people with disabilities would have even like more intense experiences around like punitive experiences in school. So how it plays out in the classroom is just your identity, all the layers would impact your experience. So when we're resisting these oppression, we have to focus on the experiences of those who are most marginalized with what we ask for and what we fight for. We also had a conversation about microaggressions, and somebody said in the group that they had never thought about certain things that we talked about as a microaggression, and they were wondering like what kind of microaggressions commonly affect Black kids in school. And so there's a lot of different information. Like if you look up about microaggressions, I think there's a study of Black students at York who compiled their experiences around microaggressions. But there's things like, you know, just comments like, could I touch your hair? That's like, I think one of the most common ones I hear about in terms of microaggressions. Just the access that people feel they should be able to get to your body and to like asking you these questions about your body as a Black person, and especially Black women and girls. That can make you so uncomfortable in the school. So like, I think it's important that people familiarize themselves with the microaggressions and like the ways how they can impact people's schooling experience.
Can I add something, Leroy?
Yes, please.
Another thing that I think teachers need to think about is like, now that we're teaching virtually, who are you always choosing to participate? Who's not participating? Whose cameras are off? Who looks tired? Or like, you have to think about all of those things when you're teaching, because I can see like there's certain students that always want to participate, but there's some that don't. So then how do you find a way to make them feel empowered? So it's like, sometimes I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do a breakout group because maybe they just don't feel comfortable in this space. So I'll just make a smaller space. And then once their confidence is built, then I'm just like, okay, but you need to share that in whole group because this is an amazing idea. So then when we go back to whole group, I'm like, I had a conversation with so-and-so and he brought up this great point. Can you share that? And then that's reminding them, this is Black excellence. Like, that's a great job that you did. And then in front of everyone, I'm like, you have to do that more often because your friends don't know the amazing things that you need to share. Like, you know what I mean? And just remind them that they're smart. And like, I do affirmations every morning. And it says like, Miss Peters believes in me. I do too. And then it says like, it starts by saying I'm smart. And it's just like really good to get them hyped throughout the day. And it says like, I'll do my best in everything I do. So then when they're doing a great job, I'm like, you really remember like our pledge, because we do a pledge every morning. I'm like, you're really doing your best. So I remind them. And I think that's something that's super important, just to make sure everyone feels empowered and acknowledged. Because there's days that you might not hear from one student, but it's like, maybe your day has to go beyond whatever time you're done school and just call the family, or just say, when everyone's logging off, I just say, can you stay on? I just want to have a quick chat before you log off. But just show that they're valued. Or if they miss a day, I'm like, oh my God, I missed you. And then I'll just like make them feel good as soon as they enter or soon as they log on. So they know that I haven't forgotten about them. And like, when they're not there, our online class is not the same. So I think it's like these little pieces that we just have to do that self-reflection and just say, like, are they participating? Why aren't they participating? How do they feel? And always do that morning check-in and say, how are you guys feeling today? Or I just say, I feel sad when I don't see you. Were you sick? Were you doing this? Like, just check in so they know that even though we're apart, we're still family. So
Yeah, I think that thing you brought up around like kids not being called on is really huge, because when we did some work with Rose Avenue, we actually asked students about their least favorite thing about school, because we didn't want to ask like leading questions around anti-Blackness. We just asked what was their least favorite thing. And a lot of students said that, a lot of the Black students who were asked said that they were never called on for answers, or that if they were called on, it would be like when they're not paying attention. So it would be like to kind of like, you know, to kind of like embarrass them or something. So I think that is an example of a microaggression. And it's loaded with the type of assumptions that we have about students. And like, there's simple ways to intervene in that. Like, so like, for example, writing every child's name on a little popsicle stick. And then when you want to call a child for an answer, you just pull one out. And then it takes away, it kind of randomizes it. So these are good suggestions that we could bring to educators too. Somebody as well asked, like, how can we move away from this idea of like moral outrage around racism so that we can just start from a place where we acknowledge we're all part of systemic racism? And I think that that's really important, because a lot of times it's like kids don't want to feel like they're a mean person or a terrible person because they did something racist. Like, no, who wants to feel like that? But at the same time, we all live in a system where everybody is socialized to do racist stuff and to you know, carry racist beliefs. So I think that this is a really important thing for working with kids, to just be able to say, like, racism is not about bullying and meanness only. Sometimes we could do something totally unintentionally be racist. And sometimes we could have a privilege that we don't choose that's part of racism too. So just opportunities for us to depersonalize racism and just acknowledge that it's systemic. So yeah.
Also adding some compassion with your kids. So when you're doing virtual learning and you always hear one kid's name pop up, and I get that it's annoying, but don't add that to the conversation you have with your kids. So don't show your child that you're annoyed with it. Talk about it with your child, right? Show them how to think about things compassionately. So, you know, hey, we're all lonely at home. You know, he's just excited to like get to the questions. Let's give the teacher a chance to just settle him so we can all hear, right? And it's about like a solution and a different thought. Okay. Not only adults need to work on this, but we can also help our kids, right? And it also helps, I find, for me personally, it helps calm me down during the virtual sessions. Yeah, and it, like, especially when microaggressions happen, I think it's great to counter that with things like Simone said, for educators and parents. And, you know, while we're at home, if we hear kids say anything, you know, my mom had like a very no tolerance policy, saying any kind of, you know, bad word or term or derogatory thing towards anybody. And that had to do with abilities, you know, anything across the gamut, right? And then if I would say why, you know, because us kids know it all, you know, she would explain in different historical contexts, or she would ask an elder, or she would help me look it up.
Yeah, making it like a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then so just, I know some people are signing off, so feel no ways if you have to sign off. Obviously, we all know it's bedtime. But we had a couple others that I just thought were really interesting, so I'll still just bring them up. Somebody was asking I worry about confronting racism on the kids, and because it's such a hard burden. So what mechanisms can we put in place for adults to take a leadership role? And so with this one, I think it is really important that we let the kids know that, like, you don't have to take this on by yourself. I'm giving you knowledge and I'm giving you tools to know about it. But like I tell my kids, first of all, like, nothing with people fighting. The kids should never step in the middle or intervene. That's not safe. And I also tell them, like, that they should always go to a caring adult if the problem is too big for them to manage. So, and that doesn't necessarily mean the teacher that's on duty, because, you know, not all adults in the building are helpful with every situation. But it's important for the kids to identify somebody in the building that they see as that caring adult that they know they can go to with issues. So even when nothing's happening at school, I ask my kid who are their caring adults? Who do they feel they can go to with anything? Sometimes it's the drama teacher, the music teacher. Usually those are the ones. But so they can identify that person who they can go to. And I tell them too, like, if you tell one person and they don't listen, keep telling more people until you find somebody who's listening to you. Because yeah, it shouldn't be all on them, and that's not fair. They need adults' support. These are complex issues and I can't even handle them on my own. So a lot of the times. And then in and somebody this is the last one, y'all, I swear. Somebody had a question about, is separating by race harmful? So they said, like, they were talking about how in a school you will see sometimes the South Asian kids hanging out together, the Black kids hanging out together, and stuff like that, and the white kids hanging out together. So, and they wanted to know, like, is that problem or is that racist? So we went back to talking about, like, what is racism at its foundation. So we talked about how to do racism, you would need prejudice, like feelings of negativity towards another group or superiority over another group. Plus you would need power to like push forward your agenda of prejudice. So I think in a lot of these cases where kids are just separating, there's not necessarily power to oppress, and there's not necessarily prejudice. Sometimes, you know, Black kids hang out at school because we have similar experiences and we just relate to each other, or we go to church together, or we, you know, sometimes kids hang out because they speak the same language. Sometimes kids hang out because they have, like, anything that helps them relate that could be to do with ethnicity and culture. So I don't think that that's a problem. I don't think that that's racist. Somebody said people find their own affinity spaces. Valerie said, yeah, exactly. So I don't think it's a problem. And I think that we can always ask kids questions. Like, if we notice that children have privilege and they only hang out with others who have privilege, we could ask them, like, what's that about? But I don't think that it is separation in and of itself is harmful. So that was all the questions that there was in Earl Grey.
I had something that a parent had told me once about helping their child to feel accepted at school. And because they had a lot of privilege and the only friends they had the most privilege at school. So the parent challenged them to make a new friend every month and share a riddle. So it's just something simple and, you know, a little geeky, a little fun. But it could, you know, just be something about your kids' interests, or it could be you coming into the school and just, you know, sharing things that could help integrate different interests among the kids.
Yeah, it's like, you don't have to be friends, but you do have to have respect. It'd be nice. Okay. So yeah, that's all our questions. We're gonna wrap up, and then y'all will, I guess, hear more about next steps. Ian, how will they find out about if there's a school specific meeting or something?
Valerie or Megan could probably speak to that, I guess.
Excellent.
Sure. The the intention is that each of the school councils, we're gonna meet, I think this Saturday again, maybe, to have a quick chat about next steps going forward. But yeah, the intention is that while the affinity spaces are still going, and there are still a couple more so far scheduled, that the schools will be like, the school council will talk to their admin about making sure that the staff equity team is speaking and having a plan and what they want to do within their team, that there is some kind of student voice that comes out of that. So the council will speak to their admin to make sure that there's some kind of student equity group that happens. And then the idea is that each school council will all come together in their own meeting in mid-February or so, and speak specifically to their schools, issues or things that they want to address or how they want to move forward. So that is the plan. So pay attention to what your councils are doing and help them.
Okay, great.
And Ian had something else he wanted to share before we all signed off tonight.
Oh, it's okay. Just that Parent Academy is happening right now, but I feel like it's okay.
What's Parent Academy?
It's like
That podcast that Ian was telling us about. I started listening to it. It's actually really good.
Oh, the Nice White Parents one?
Oh, Nice White Parents. That's what it was.
Well, Parent Academy is a thing that the community support workers run for with parents. It's a speaker series this year, and so I don't know. I can. Oh yeah, because I'm sharing my screen. I guess I can make it really quick. No, it's late. But yeah, so we have this site. I'll throw the link in the chat. Parent Academy is here. So it's this series that we're running right now. They're doing the Anti-Racist Baby book. They're having a book discussion about it. We had it last night. It was really great. And then Michelle Monroe on Thursday, February 4th is doing Who Does What in Education. It's really just about TDSB and like how it works and who's who and how to kind of put it together if you're thinking about doing like council kind of stuff. And just navigating the system as a parent if you're looking to address an issue. And then Leroy is coming in to do Talking with Kids About Race and Racism, February 9th. And then part 2 of the Anti-Racist. Huh?
Anti-Nudes is too.
Anti-Nudes too? Amazing. Okay, I wasn't sure. That's great. And the book club, Anti-Racist Baby, you can join without having been to part 1. So I just wanted to let people know about some opportunities.
Nice. Okay, y'all. Thank you so much for talking to us again.
Appreciate you guys participating.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. This was wonderful. And yeah, I strongly suggest that any other councils that want to do something specific at their school with Freedom School, reach out to Leroy and Anti-Nudes and they will help you.
Yeah. Be happy to.
They help. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
All right.
Great, everybody. Take good care.
Thank you. Thank you, Leroy. It was really great going through this with you.
Thanks for being part of it.
Right, Ben. Oh, Marcia says good night, everybody.